There are forces in this universe that defy all human logic. Forces of such impossible scale, we believe they can only strike once. It is said that a man cannot be scorched by the same sun twice. He was. In the dying summer of 1945, the world was holding its breath. An empire was on its knees, yet it would not break. Cities had been turned to ash by conventional fire. But the final act of the war was yet to be written, conceived in a secret fire that mimicked the stars. In this world, teetering on the edge of a new and terrible age, one man, a single engineer, would stand at the epicenter of humanity's most terrible invention. Not once, but twice. This is the story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi and his journey through the fire to become a witness for the world, a testament to the terrible resilience of the human spirit. The air in Hiroshima on the morning of August 6th was thick with the humidity of a southern Japanese summer. It was clear, achingly beautiful, a sky of infinite blue that promised another day of oppressive heat. For Tsutomu Yamaguchi, it was the end of a journey. A 3-month business trip for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries was concluding. He was a man of logic, of blueprints and stress calculations, a naval engineer whose world was defined by the precise and the predictable. At 29, he was pragmatic, dedicated, a husband and a new father. His mind was on the future, on the ship designs he had been working on, but more pressingly, on the train ticket that would take him home to his wife, Hisako, and their infant son, Katsutoshi. Home. The word itself was a comfort, a small island of peace in a nation consumed by a war it was clearly losing. He walked with his colleagues, 2 other engineers named Akira Iwanaga and Kuniyoshi Sato, towards the shipyards. The city was alive around them. Streetcars rumbled past, their bells clanging a rhythm of mundane persistence. The scent of salt water from the Ota River mingled with the smoke from countless kitchen fires. There was a tension in the air, a constant low-grade anxiety that had become the background noise of Japanese life. Air raid sirens were a common occurrence, but today there was only one American B-29 bomber, its silver fuselage glinting lazily in the morning sun. A weather plane, most assumed. Nothing to fear. Yamaguchi glanced up, a fleeting thought crossing his mind, before returning his attention to the conversation, to the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. He was thinking of his family, of the simple meal he might share with them in Nagasaki. He was thinking of the life that awaited him beyond this final day of work. He never heard the whistle. He never heard the fall. There was only the pika. It was not a flash in the way a camera flashes. It was the world turning inside out. A silent, searing, impossible magnesium whiteness that erased everything. It was as if a second sun had been born a few hundred feet above the city, and its first act was to swallow the sky. In that split second, before the sound, before the force, there was only the pure, terrifying light. It bleached the world of all color, all shadow, all substance. Yamaguchi was thrown from his feet, not by a wave of air, but by the sheer force of the expanding universe. He was lifted, twisted, and slammed into the soft earth of a potato patch, the world a silent, searing white. Then came the dawn, the sound. But it was not a sound one hears with the ears. It was a concussion that was felt in the bones, in the teeth, in the very soul. It was the sound of the sky cracking open, the sound of a city being broken in a single instant. The air, which a moment before had been still and heavy, was now a physical wall, a tidal wave of force moving faster than thunder, obliterating everything in its path. Buildings were not demolished. They were vaporized, their component parts, wood, tile, glass, paper, hurled into a vortex of unimaginable violence. When Tsutomu Yamaguchi opened his eyes, the world was gone. The brilliant blue sky was now a bruised, churning darkness, a ceiling of smoke and ash that blotted out the sun he had just seen. The air, thick and hot, tasted of dust and something metallic, something ancient and wrong. He was alive, but the world he had known a moment before was dead. His left side was a canvas of exquisite pain. The light had seared him, cooking the exposed skin. His eardrums were ruptured. The world now a muffled, roaring silence. He could not see clearly, the intensity of the flash having burned temporary blindness into his retinas. He stumbled to his feet, a man of logic in a world that had abandoned all rules. His colleagues were there, also stunned, also burned. They were just under 2 miles from the hypocenter, a distance that should have meant certain death, but by some cosmic lottery, they had survived the initial blast. The true ordeal, however, was only just beginning. Hiroshima was no longer a city. It was a ruin, a Boschian hellscape painted in shades of gray and black. The structures that remained were skeletal, scorched husks groaning in the superheated wind. But it was the human cost that broke the mind. Figures moved through the gloom, their arms outstretched like zombies, skin hanging from their bodies in burned, melted ribbons. They were silent, not screaming, their shock too profound for sound. They moved in a slow, shuffling pilgrimage toward the river, seeking water, seeking relief that would not come. These were the ghosts of Hiroshima, the living dead, moving through the ruins of their own lives. The air was filled with the sweet, sickening smell of burning flesh and the ever-present dust of pulverized buildings. Yamaguchi, his own body a geography of pain, felt a primal urge overwhelm his training. His logic, his very sense of self, it was the urge to survive. To get home, he and his colleagues found their way to an air raid shelter, a cramped, dark space already filled with the wounded and the dying. There, in the suffocating darkness, they spent the night, listening to the city burn. The fires, fanned by the strange, violent winds the bomb itself had created, raged unchecked, a great funeral pyre for 250,000 souls. In that darkness, Yamaguchi's logical mind raced. He had worked on weapons. He understood explosives. But this was different. This was not an explosion. It was an extermination. A piece of the sun had been dropped on them. He did not know the word atomic or radiation, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that he had witnessed the end of a world. The stories we tell about history often focus on the grand scale, the decisions of generals, the fall of empires, the signing of treaties. But the true fabric of history is woven from individual threads of experience, from the choices and agonies of ordinary people caught in extraordinary tides. If you find this journey into the heart of a single resilient soul to be meaningful, consider subscribing and joining a community dedicated to remembering the human side of our shared past. The next morning, what was left of the Japanese authorities began to organize relief. But the city was a dead zone. The challenge was simply incomprehensible. A strange, greasy black rain began to fall, staining their skin, carrying radioactive fallout from the mushroom cloud that had climbed miles into the atmosphere. Yamaguchi and his friends knew they had to leave. They made their way to the train station, a journey that took them through the heart of the annihilation. They walked over a bridge so packed with the dead and the dying it was nearly impassable. The Ota River, which had been a source of life, was now choked with bodies. People who had thrown themselves into the water to escape the fire, only to drown or be boiled alive. At the station, a miracle. A train was preparing to leave, heading south, heading towards Nagasaki. The carriages were packed with the wounded, a moving hospital of burns and shock. Yamaguchi found a seat, his body screaming in protest, his mind numb. As the train lurched forward, pulling away from the smoldering corpse of Hiroshima, he looked out the window. He saw shadows burned into stone walls, the permanent, ghostly outlines of people who had been vaporized where they stood. He was leaving hell, but he did not know that hell had seared itself into his very cells, that it was traveling with him, an invisible passenger, on the long, slow journey home. The journey was a fever dream. The other passengers, those from outside the city, stared at him and the other survivors. They saw the burns, the vacant eyes, but they could not comprehend the story behind them. Whispers of a new type of bomb circulated, but the words were meaningless. How could you describe the sun falling from the sky? Yamaguchi, wrapped in bandages, his body racked with fever, could only sit in silence, the images of what he had seen playing on a loop in his mind. The shuffling ghosts, the river of the dead, the black rain. He was a messenger from a future no one could have imagined. He arrived in Nagasaki on August 8th, a ghost returning to the land of the living. His own mother did not recognize him at first, so swollen and disfigured was his face. His wife, Hisako, cleaned his horrific burns with oil and held him as he shivered with a fever that seemed to burn from the inside out. He had survived. He was home. He was safe. For one day, there was a fragile, desperate peace. He was alive. His family was alive. And Hiroshima was a nightmare 100 miles away. He was a man of duty, and despite his injuries, he knew he had to report to his superiors at Mitsubishi. He had to tell them what he had seen. On the morning of August 9th, Tsutomu Yamaguchi, his body wrapped in fresh white bandages, walked into his office at the Mitsubishi plant in Nagasaki. He was weak, dizzy, but determined. He stood before his director, a man of authority, and began to recount the impossible. He spoke of the single plane, the silent, blinding flash, the shock wave that turned a city to dust. He described the mushroom cloud, a great, terrible cauliflower climbing into the heavens. His director listened, his face a mask of skepticism. A single bomb that could destroy an entire city? It sounded like madness. It was the raving of a shell-shocked man. "You're an engineer, Yamaguchi," his boss said, his voice laced with disbelief. "How could one bomb do all that?" As Yamaguchi struggled to find the words, to use the language of physics and engineering to describe something that felt mythological, the world outside the window turned white. A brilliant, searing magnesium flash filled the room, identical to the one he had seen 3 days prior. Before his disbelieving boss could even react, the reinforced window of the office imploded. The universe, for the second time in 72 hours, erupted. The shockwave hit the building like a titan's fist, ripping through the structure. Yamaguchi was thrown to the floor, the force tearing the new bandages from his body, reopening the wounds that had only just begun to scab over. Glass and debris rained down upon him, lying there, amidst the screaming and the chaos. As the building groaned around him, a single, chilling thought pierced through his pain and terror. A thought so insane, it felt like a revelation. The mushroom cloud has followed me here. He had not escaped hell. He had simply brought it home with him. The epicenter of the Nagasaki blast was, like in Hiroshima, just under 2 miles away from where he stood. He had once again been on the survivable edge of a nuclear inferno. The city's hilly topography had offered some protection, shielding parts of the valley from the full force of the blast. But for the man lying on the floor of his office, it was not a matter of geography or luck. It was a curse. He was marked. He was the man the sun had decided to follow. He stumbled out of the ruined building and began the desperate search for his family. The city he had called home was now another smoldering ruin, another canvas of gray and black. The panic he felt was different this time. It was not the shock of the unknown. It was the horror of the familiar. He knew what to look for. He knew the shapes of the dead. He knew the smell. He raced through the wreckage, his own burns screaming, his only thought for his wife and son. He found his home damaged but standing. And then, a second miracle. Hisako and Katsutoshi were alive. She had taken the baby out to search for burn ointment for her husband, and they had been in a tunnel when the bomb fell, shielding them from the worst of the blast and heat. The family was together. They were alive. They had survived. But survival is not a single event. It is a long and arduous process. In the days that followed, the invisible fire that Yamaguchi had carried from Hiroshima began to consume him. This was the second attack, the silent one. Radiation sickness. His hair fell out in clumps. The burns on his skin, already horrific, turned a violent purple and refused to heal. He was gripped by a fever that would not break. And for weeks, he vomited relentlessly, his body trying to expel the poison that was rewriting his cells. He lay on his futon, hovering in the twilight between life and death, listening to the emperor's voice on the radio declare Japan's surrender. The war was over. But for Tsutomu Yamaguchi and the thousands of other hibakusha, the survivors of the atomic bombs, a new private war was just beginning. A war against their own bodies, against their memories, and against a world that did not understand what had happened to them. This journey of surviving not one, but two atomic crucibles is a story that pushes the boundaries of human endurance. It is a testament to a will to live that defies comprehension. If this chronicle of resilience resonates with you, please take a moment to like this video and share it. By doing so, you help ensure that these vital stories from our past are not forgotten, but are carried forward to teach and inspire a new generation. The years that followed the end of the war were a quiet, painful struggle. Japan was a broken nation, and the hibakusha were its most visible yet often most shunned reminders of that defeat. They were marked people. There was widespread fear and ignorance about radiation. Many believed it was contagious. Survivors struggled to find work, to find spouses. They were seen as damaged goods, their health uncertain, their futures compromised. Yamaguchi, his body permanently scarred, his health precarious, faced this silent discrimination. He worked for a time as a translator for the Allied forces, but his primary focus was survival, raising his family in a world that seemed determined to forget the fire that had forged them. For decades, he remained silent about his unique experience. He did not speak of being in both cities. To be a survivor of one was burden enough. To claim to have survived both seemed like a boast, a macabre distinction he did not want. The memories were a private torment, a weight he carried in the quiet hours of the night. He watched as his country rebuilt itself, as new cities rose from the ashes of the old. Glass towers and neon lights replaced the scorched earth and skeletal ruins, but the ghosts remained. He saw the effects of the bomb play out in slow motion. His wife, Hisako, was poisoned by the black rain she had encountered while searching for him. She would live a long life, but suffer from kidney and liver cancer, a constant, painful reminder of those August days. He watched his own children grow up under the shadow of the bomb, their health a constant source of anxiety. The poison of 1945 did not end when the fires went out. It echoed down through the generations. His son, Katsutoshi, the infant who had survived the blast in a tunnel, would later die of cancer in his middle age. The bomb had reached through time to claim him. This personal generational tragedy was the catalyst. The quiet engineer, the man who had retreated into the silence of his own memory, found his voice. He realized that his survival was not a curse. It was a responsibility. How many people had witnessed what he had witnessed? How many could speak with the authority of one who had stood in the heart of two separate atomic storms? He had been spared for a reason: to bear witness. In his 80s, when most men have settled into the quiet rhythms of old age, Tsutomu Yamaguchi began his final, most important mission. He began to speak. He wrote a book. He gave interviews. He joined the growing movement of hibakusha, calling for the abolition of nuclear weapons. His voice was not loud or angry. It was calm, measured, the voice of an engineer reporting his findings. But his testimony was devastating. He could describe the smell of burning Hiroshima and the sound of shattering glass in Nagasaki with an authority that was unassailable. He was not speaking from history books. He was speaking from his own scarred skin, from his own irradiated bones. His journey culminated in 2006, at the age of 90. He traveled to New York City, to the headquarters of the United Nations. He stood before a delegation, a small, frail man carrying the weight of 2 cities within him. He told his story. He spoke of the blinding light, of the black rain, of the long, slow death of radiation sickness. He spoke of his son, and he made a simple, powerful plea. He pleaded for humanity to learn from its most terrible mistake. He argued that the existence of nuclear weapons was a fundamental insanity, a suicide pact that the world had made with itself. "The reason that I hate the atomic bomb," he said, "is because of what it does to the dignity of human beings." In that moment, he was no longer just an engineer from Nagasaki. He was a living embodiment of the 20th century's darkest chapter, a messenger from the past with an urgent warning for the future. He had completed his transformation. He had survived the fire, he had endured the long silence, and he had finally emerged as a prophet of peace, his own life the undeniable evidence for his cause. He had seen humanity's capacity for self-destruction twice, and he would spend the rest of his days reminding us of our capacity for wisdom and survival. Tsutomu Yamaguchi died in 2010, at the age of 93. His life spanned an incredible arc of human history, from the age of imperial ambition to the dawn of the nuclear age and into the complexities of the 21st century. His death was caused by stomach cancer, another long shadow cast by the events of 1945. But his legacy is not one of victimhood. It is a legacy of incredible, improbable survival, and more importantly, of profound purpose. His story forces us to confront the true meaning of the atomic age. We often think of the bombs as singular events, as the final dramatic full stops at the end of a long and bloody war. But Yamaguchi's life teaches us that they were not endings. They were beginnings. They were the beginning of a new kind of fear, a new kind of sickness, a new kind of responsibility that we all share. His journey through 2 of the most horrific events in human history was not a statistical anomaly. It was a pilgrimage. He was a man who walked through the valley of the shadow of death twice and emerged on the other side with a message for all of us, a message about the fragility of life, the insanity of our ultimate weapons, and the incredible, stubborn resilience of the human heart to endure, to remember, and to hope for a better world. The man who the sun fell on twice spent the rest of his days trying to ensure that it would never, ever fall on anyone again. The story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi is not just a piece of history. It is a living lesson. It reminds us that behind the grand narratives of war and politics are individual human hearts, capable of enduring the unimaginable. If his journey has moved you, let his legacy be a catalyst for your own reflection. In the comments below, share one thought on what his story teaches us about resilience and our responsibility to the future. For in sharing our understanding, we keep his vital testimony alive.